Title: The Hammersmith Ghost, the real haunting that terrified London. Help this channel grow. Like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe for more stories. This helps us a lot. Thank you. The story begins. The ghost of Hammersmith walks again. London, 1804. The cold air of January crawled through the narrow lanes of Hammersmith, a quiet district on the western edge of the city. By day, it was ordinary brick cottages, a churchyard ringed with black iron railings, and the distant hum of horse-drawn carriages. But when night fell, no one dared to walk alone. For weeks, the townspeople had whispered of a ghost, a tall figure in white, haunting the road between the church and the pub, gliding out of the mist to choke passers-by before vanishing into the dark. It was said to be the spirit of a man buried without proper rites, doomed to wander for eternity. Inside the Black Lion Tavern, 22-year-old Thomas Millwood slammed his mug onto the table. He had heard enough. "Ghosts don't exist," he muttered. "It's someone playing tricks." Thomas was a bricklayer, young, strong, and stubborn. His white work clothes, chalk-stained and dusty, made him stand out in the dark. His friends tried to laugh it off, but the fear in their eyes betrayed them. "Be careful out there," one said quietly. Thomas smirked, pulling on his coat. "I'll be fine. I'll walk the ghost home myself." He stepped out into the freezing air. The streets were empty, save for the occasional flicker of a lantern swinging in the fog. From the churchyard came the sound of something scraping, a low drag of metal against stone, then silence. Thomas quickened his pace down Black Lion Lane. The mist thickened, curling around his legs like smoke. In the distance, two night watchmen passed, clutching their clubs and pistols. "Go back," one shouted. "The ghost walks tonight." Thomas waved them off. "Tell your ghost I'm not afraid." A few minutes later, he reached his parents' home. His sister, Ent, peered nervously through the peephole before unlocking the door. "Did you see it?" she whispered. "There's nothing to see," Thomas said, forcing a grin. "Just shadows playing tricks." He sat by the fire, warming his hands, listening to the wind rattle the shutters. But the quiet didn't last. From outside came a faint sound, like breathing, slow and rhythmic, and froze. "Thomas, did you hear that?" He stood and opened the window. Cold fog poured inside. Across the lane, near the church gate, a pale figure shimmered between the gravestones, motionless, watching. Thomas blinked. The figure was gone. Or had it moved closer? He closed the window, forcing a laugh he didn't believe. Outside, the fog thickened again, swallowing the road, the church, and the sound of his heartbeat. That was the night the Hammersmith ghost returned, and before the week was over, fear would claim its first victim. The night of the haunting. The clock struck 10. Fog coiled around the narrow lanes of Hammersmith like something alive. Thomas Millwood pulled his coat tight and stepped into the cold, his breath hanging in the air. He was angry at the fear that had turned his town into a ghost story. Tonight, he'd prove the truth. There was no such thing as a haunting. The street lamps flickered as he walked down Black Lion Lane, the same road where the so-called ghost had attacked travelers. His boots echoed softly against the cobblestones. From the churchyard came the faint sound of rustling, as though something moved among the gravestones. Then came the whisper. At first it was faint, like wind through grass. Then clearer, a low voice calling his name. "Thomas!" He froze. The fog thickened until the world seemed made of smoke. A figure stood at the far end of the lane, tall, draped in white, face hidden beneath a hood. It didn't walk. It glided, smooth and soundless, the folds of its cloak rippling as if stirred by an unseen wind. Thomas swallowed hard, forcing a nervous laugh. "All right," he called. "You've had your fun. Who is it? Show yourself." The figure didn't stop. It came closer. Thomas stepped forward, his fists clenched. "You think you can scare me?" Still no answer. Then the light from a distant window glinted off the figure's robe, wet, shimmering, almost translucent. Beneath it he thought he saw bones. The air turned colder. The fog seemed to hum. Every instinct screamed to run, yet his legs refused. The white figure lifted an arm and pointed straight at him. Thomas staggered back, tripping over the stones. The voice came again, louder this time, hollow and echoing. "You cannot save her." He turned and ran. The road stretched endlessly before him, his heart pounding in his throat. Behind him, the sound of footsteps followed, slow, deliberate, never hurrying, yet always near. At the corner, a flash of movement. 2 men with lanterns, night watchmen. Thomas waved frantically. "It's there. The ghost, it's real." But before they could answer, a sharp crack split the night. The sound of a musket firing. A scream followed, then silence. The watchmen rushed forward, their lantern light cutting through the fog. On the ground lay Thomas, motionless, eyes open in disbelief. His white work clothes glowed pale against the dirt. The figure in white was gone. Only the mist remained, curling around his still body as if the night itself was claiming him. From somewhere beyond the fog came the distant toll of a church bell, 12 slow chimes that carried through the empty streets. By morning, the people of Hammersmith would say the ghost had struck again. But no one could agree on what they saw that night. A spirit from the grave, or the fear of one made real. The haunting that never ended. Morning light crept over the rooftops of Hammersmith, pale and indifferent, as though the night's horror had never happened. But word traveled fast. By sunrise, the whispers had begun. They found a body on Black Lion Lane. The ghost has taken another. When the watchman returned to the tavern with the news, the crowd fell silent. No one spoke Thomas Millwood's name, not at first. They just said him. Everyone already knew who it was. Inside the small Millwood home, his sister and sat by the fire, trembling, replaying the echo of a scream that had torn through the fog hours earlier. She had told herself it was a trick of the wind, but when the knock came on the door just before dawn, she already knew what they'd say. "Thomas is gone." She didn't cry. She couldn't. She simply nodded, as though she had been expecting this ending all along. The town of fear. By midday, the news had reached every house, every cobblestone street. The Hammersmith ghost had claimed a victim. Or so they believed. For weeks, the story had haunted the town. A figure wrapped in white burial shrouds, seen drifting through the churchyard, grabbing travelers by the throat before fading into mist. Now, the ghost had a body to its name. Mothers locked their doors before sunset. Men carried pistols on their nightly walks. And the graveyard, once a place of quiet mourning, became the most feared corner of London. But something about the story didn't sit right. The men who had found Thomas swore the ghost had vanished into the fog, but one detail stood out. There was a bullet wound, direct, right between the eyes. A confession in the fog. 2 days later, a man came forward. Francis Smith, the local tax collector, pale, shaking, eyes red from sleepless nights. He confessed that he had been patrolling the area that night with a musket, hoping to catch the ghost. "I didn't mean to kill him," he said, voice breaking. "I thought he was the spirit. He was all in white. I fired before I could think." The people stared at him in disbelief. This quiet, nervous man, the one they'd seen every week collecting dues, was the one who had ended Thomas Millwood's life. And yet, many couldn't bring themselves to hate him. After all, hadn't everyone been terrified? The town's hysteria had reached such a fever pitch that even a shadow could make a grown man pull the trigger. The trial. The courtroom was packed. The judge's robes shimmered in the candlelight as he read the charge. Murder in the first degree. Francis stood trembling, clutching his hat to his chest. He insisted he had acted out of fear, that he truly believed the Hammersmith ghost was real. He had waited for nights, hiding behind hedges, watching the fog for any sign of the specter that had terrorized his town. And then that night he saw the white figure emerge. He swore that he shouted a warning. He claimed the figure charged at him. He fired in panic. The courtroom murmured. Some nodded in sympathy. Others shook their heads. The prosecutor stood, voice booming. "You shot an unarmed man because of superstition. You killed out of fear, not reason." The words hung heavy. For a moment, even Francis seemed to believe them. When the verdict was read, the gavel struck like thunder. "Guilty." Sentence, "Death." Gasps filled the room. And Millwood wept silently in the back row. Francis lowered his head and whispered a prayer. the king's pardon. But the story did not end there. When word of the execution reached the King of England, he intervened. Francis Smith's sentence was commuted to 1 year in prison. The king declared that fear, real, powerful fear, could drive men to madness. Francis had been blinded not by hatred, but by terror. And so, the Hammersmith Ghost case became more than a ghost story. It became a lesson, one that would change British law forever. From that day forward, the courts would recognize what came to be known as the mistaken self-defense rule. If a person truly and reasonably believes they are in danger, they have the right to defend themselves, even if they are wrong. Thomas Millwood's death had rewritten the law of the land. But for Hammersmith, it changed something deeper. The true ghost revealed. Months later, when the hysteria finally faded, a confession came, one that turned the town's fear to shame. A local shoemaker, pale and thin, stepped forward. He admitted he had been dressing in white sheets, haunting the streets at night. He had done it, he said, to scare his apprentices who had frightened his children with ghost stories. A cruel prank, a joke that had gone too far. The people listened in silence. He had never meant to kill anyone. He had never meant for anyone to die. Yet because of his games, a man was buried and another's life was destroyed. The shoemaker was released with a warning, though many thought that the true punishment was living with what he'd caused. The spirit that stayed. Years passed. The story became folklore, a cautionary tale told beside pub fires and whispered among travelers. But even as time moved on, some swore that Hammersmith never truly rid itself of the ghost. On misty winter nights, locals claimed they could still see the white figure drifting through the cemetery, silent and slow. Others said they'd heard footsteps echoing down Black Lion Lane, followed by a single gunshot, always the same, and then nothing. And Millwood lived the rest of her life in that same house by the churchyard. She never married, never left Hammersmith. Neighbors often saw her standing by the window after dark, staring into the fog as if waiting for her brother to walk home again. And sometimes, late at night, she swore she heard him. A faint knock at the door. A voice saying softly, "It's me, Anne." Legacy of the Hammersmith Ghost. More than 2 centuries later, historians still debate what really happened. Was it mass hysteria? A ghostly presence? Or something darker? A reflection of how easily fear can turn people against each other? What began as whispers of a haunting became a tragedy that changed British law and lingered in legend. The story of the Hammersmith Ghost remains one of the oldest unsolved horrors in London's history, because whether the spirit was real or not, its shadow never left. Every January, on cold, foggy nights, people still walk that road and say they can feel someone following them just out of sight, breathing softly behind the mist. And in that silence, you can almost hear Thomas Millwood's last words echo through time. There are no ghosts, but Hammersmith still isn't sure.